Many years ago, when I first started this channel, several of my earliest videos were about army sizes, Gondor, Rohan, elves, dwarves, etc, etc. I wanted to do a throwback to those videos, this time with a small yet important group that fought silently and thanklessly in the northern land of Eriador. So in this video, let's ask the question, how many Rangers of the North were there? As per usual, a bit of background first. The Rangers of the North, or sometimes the Northern Dunedain, were those Arnorians who survived the destruction of Arnor at the hands of Angmar a little over 1,000 years before the War of the Ring. Prince Aranarth, son of the last King Arvidui, decided that instead of refounding Arnor, the remaining Dunedain would live in secret, patrolling the wilderness and guarding the remaining peoples of Eriador from many threats that surrounded them. They had mixed fortunes, and by the time of the War of the Ring, they had dwindled even further. So the question is, how many were there? If you're familiar with my earliest videos, Toaster Microphone, Slightly Worse Editing, then you will know that most of those videos used the term guesstimation quite a bit. Basically, estimating and guessing using the information that Tolkien actually gave us, because unfortunately, Tolkien rarely gave definitive sizes of armies, populations, etc., and it's no different with the Rangers of the North. The only information we have in regards to numbers is that at one point the Guard of the Shire was doubled, and that the Grey Company which rode south to assist Aragorn consisted of 30 Rangers. Given that 30 is the only real number we're given, it's commonly believed that there probably wasn't that many Rangers. After all, apart from the Grey Company, we don't see or encounter any except for Aragorn. There are none encountered in Bree, there are none encountered on the road to Rivendell, and apart from Aragorn, none are seen in Rivendell, although some did help scout the surrounding lands before the Fellowship's departure. You'd think if there were a decent amount of them running around the north, you might have seen them out in force to combat the Nazgul or provide aid to their chieftain who was protecting the most valuable item in Middle-earth. On top of that, those guarding the Shire were killed or driven away by the Nazgul, but even after the Nazgul were gone, they didn't return. It's for this reason that Saruman was able to take over the Shire. Barlaam Butterpa, owner of the Prancing Pony, even specifically mentions that he heard the Rangers had gone away. Gandalf then replies that the Rangers, meaning the Grey Company, had returned. This implies that there wasn't a reserve of Rangers that were ready to go, and those that had fallen at Sarn Ford or went away south to aid Aragorn were truly irreplaceable, and for that reason, Bree and the Shire were on their own. But it might be a little bit more complex than that. Referring to the previous bit about the Rangers no longer guarding the Shire, it's possible that the Rangers could have returned, but that there were more pressing issues in the east. Remember, the Misty Mountains were active with orcs during the War of the Ring, and they had invaded Eriador in the past. For that reason, it's possible that the Rangers who hadn't been killed or went south were instead fighting orc incursions in eastern Eriador, around the lands of Rhudaur and the Etenmoors. However, I do want to say that while this is a possibility, based on the fact that we know orcs from the Misty Mountains raided east into the Vales of Anduin, there is nothing that says that they went west as well. We also don't know enough about the Rangers and their most common whereabouts to say that this means there were only a few of them. For example, Tolkien left behind a note which tells us that many of the Northern Dunedain lived in villages in a place called the Angle, a strip of land between the rivers Horwell and Loudwater. We also know that Chieftain Arador, Aragorn's grandfather, had a house in the Coldfells in northern Rhudaur, meaning it's possible that some of the other Dunedain did the same. We also know they visited places such as Weathertop and the ruined city of Fornost. Whether they had a permanent dwelling or camp there is unknown, but once again, it might mean that they could be found in other ruins across Eriador. And it should be noted that the Grey Company was gathered in haste. We don't know where Halbarad was when he received the message. He may have been in the Angle, but then he also may have been in Rivendell considering he had the Sons of Elrond with him. Regardless, we know that he had little time to gather the Grey Company. He almost certainly received the message sometime after the 16th of February, and he arrived in Rohan on the 6th of March. When you take into the account the travel time between either the Angle or Rivendell and Rohan, Halbarad might have only had a few days to gather his men, hence why only 30 could be found. And finally, there's the question of the reunited kingdom. Aragorn intended on rebuilding Fornost, and we know that he dwelt in Annúminas at times during the Fourth Age. Of course, there was a population of men in Breeland, although they probably only numbered around 10,000 at an absolute maximum. However, the true refounding of Arnor would surely be at the hands of the Dunedain. But, using the Grey Company as a guide, there might only be a few hundred of them, certainly no more than 1,000 Northern Dunedain. Then, refounding Arnor would be an impossible task without help from Gondor. Presumably, if Aragorn wanted to rebuild both Annúminas and Fornost, he must have believed he had enough people around to at least found something that resembled decent settlements. Okay, so what's the conclusion here? Well, even though I have given reasons as to why there might be more rangers, the reality is that the hard evidence that Tolkien gives us suggests that there weren't that many rangers, maybe no more than 100 in total, meaning that the Northern Dunedain population, as I said before, might be a few hundred and certainly no more than 1,000. Yes, this is a tiny number for the size of the land of Eriador, and yes, it raises questions as to how Arnor possibly could have been refounded, but this is what Tolkien may have had in mind, and, as I've pointed out in past videos, Tolkien wasn't that consistent when it came to demographics. But there's a way around this, in that there might not have been many rangers, but there were still more Northern Dunedain, and the answer is simple. All of the rangers were Northern Dunedain, but not all of the Northern Dunedain were rangers. Basically, being a ranger of the North was just a job, and this would make sense. Being a ranger was a difficult, dangerous job that required spending long amounts of time in the wilderness. It's a job that, well, if everyone was a ranger, then society wouldn't exactly function properly. And the Northern Dunedain did have a society. Yes, the rangers were wanderers, but their families had villages and houses. Unless every ranger was a superhuman who could do everything at once, which seems unlikely, then they still would have needed builders, farmers, craftsmen, people who could look after the elderly and the young, just as the Dunedain would have needed when Arnor was around. Although perhaps some could achieve these tasks themselves, every ranger that was abroad would have had a support network behind them, someone who made their clothes, prepared their rations, smithed, and maintained their weapons and armor. Using this reasoning, you can explain a lot. There were enough Northern Dunedain around, perhaps a few thousand or more, and for that reason, Aragorn could rebuild Annúminas and Fornost and resettle Arnor. But despite having a larger population at home, there were still few rangers, perhaps a few hundred at maximum, because it was a difficult and dangerous profession, and each death was not easily replaceable, which is why after the Nazgul attack and the Grey Company left, that the rangers could no longer afford to defend places like the Shire from close proximity. Ultimately, it's all guesswork. Like I said at the start of the video, Tolkien rarely went into depth when it came to numbers, both from a demographic perspective and a military perspective. It's led to a lot of people other than myself scouring the texts, using historical context from our own world, and applying it to Middle-earth to come up with some rational numbers. And honestly, I think that's good enough. A rational number. Perhaps there were only a few hundred Dunedain, perhaps there were a few thousand. I don't think it really changes that much. As long as the guesses are reasonable and not something like 50 more billion rangers, I think it's fine, and I hope you do too. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it or at least found it interesting. Fun fact, much like the Regions of Gondor video, I tried writing a script for this video several times in the past, and I guess I just never liked it. I think I was trying to make an argument rather than just offering potential answers, and then I think I wasn't satisfied with my own arguments, hence the video never got made. Anyway, here it is, a throwback to early Darth Gandalf. Cheers, farewell, and remember, I really hate it when my own script doesn't just hand me a stupid joke and I actually have to think of something, but I can't, so I just end up ranting like this. Honestly, why did I name my channel Darth Gandalf, and why do I do this stupid bit at the end of every video?